podcast. It's, sometimes I get an opportunity to do a podcast with someone that I've been looking forward to for a very long time. This is one of those instances. As you've probably heard me talk about, one of my favorite books in the world is Fifth Sacred Thing. And right now I'm here with the author, Starhawk. So this is a real treat. Welcome to the podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason you're here in Austin is you just launched your new book, City of Refuge.
Yes.
Which is the sequel to Fifth Sacred Thing.
That's right.
And so you're cruising the country talking about your new book.
Yeah, it's, a lot of people think it might be crazy to write a sequel to a book after 20 years, and they're probably right, but that's never actually stopped me from doing anything in my life.
Well, the counterpoint to that is maybe you wrote it 20 years ago, but it was so ahead of its time
right,
that maybe it was like it became really prescient, recently, because that book, the ideas that you put forward were way beyond 1993 or 1996 or whatever that book came out.
Yeah, some of them were kind of eerily, almost prophetic. And
yeah, absolutely.
Some of them I hope are actually not prophetic.
Yeah. So for people who aren't familiar with the book, I really geek out on kind of utopian philosophy, and one of my favorite books of all time was Aldous Huxley's Island, and that was the book for me for a long time. It talks about a world that you could recreate with different rituals and different rules and different morals and codes, and how you could create a society from the ground up that functioned more efficiently than the one we have. And then so that was my book, and then I read The Fifth Sacred Thing, and it was taking that principle, obviously its own flavor, its own color, and advancing it in a lot of ways and placing it in conflict with a very real kind of dystopian culture, and how when utopia and dystopia clash, how the resolution could be played out. And I thought the way that you did it in that book was just brilliant.
For me, when I was writing The Fifth Sacred Thing, I was really wrestling with the question, how could a peaceful society defend itself against violence? I had been doing a lot of research for the book. The book I wrote previously is called Truth or Dare: Encounters with Power, Authority, and Mystery. And part of it is a historical examination of the transition from these matrifocal, kind of goddess-centered, peaceable cultures that are actually at the root of European and Middle Eastern culture to these more warlike, patriarchal dominator cultures way back in, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 BC. And I was thinking about that transition and how bound up that was with war and conquest and violence, and then thinking about, could it have been different? Is there a way for a culture that is based on peace to survive when it gets attacked without either being overrun or transforming itself into something like the culture that's attacking it? And but I decided not to set it in the past. I wanted to set it in the future because it seemed more hopeful and to require less rooting around libraries and footnotes and things like that. I wanted to do something where the research would be like backpacking and hiking around in the mountains. And so in The Fifth Sacred Thing, Northern California has become a peaceable, multiracial, multicultural, ecologically balanced society after the meltdown, the environmental, social meltdown of the country. But Southern California has gone the opposite direction and become militarist and warlike and racially and culturally divided on every level. And so when the Southlands invade the North has to decide, how do we fight? How do we fight without losing what we are?
Yeah.
And it centers around Bird, who is a musician who sort of turns guerrilla and goes down to the Southlands to fight, and Drone, who's a healer, and Maya, who's the old woman, the storyteller, who's kind of the witness who's seen the whole century of progression of all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the way you play out that conflict, for those of you who haven't read the book, is just really, really powerful. I mean, it ascends to the higher principles of consciousness, you know, and I think it's beautiful when you can see something played out like that, because it's always, you know, even in some of my favorite movies, it's like take Avatar, for example, you know, love that movie. It's great, but
yeah, me too.
it's still, you know, they still go to war.
In the end, it's still like even nature says, all right, let's, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's still like very conscious, very cool, but it's still, we decide for war. And I think the tactic that, you know, the peaceable Northerners in Fifth Sacred Thing take is to just offer them a place at the table.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, I think, such a powerful thing. And we've seen that play out. You know, you've seen Gandhi, you know, take these methods, and they're always very, very effective, because violence breeds violence, aggression breeds aggression. You know, that's just tends to be the way of the world. And if you diffuse a situation like that, you may take a few blows, but less than you would if you're fighting. And, you know, you can change the hearts and minds of the aggressors. Because I think inherently we are all good people. We are the same person, you know, and that's the truth. So you have truth on your side. When you do that.
Well, that's why Gandhi called what he was doing satyagraha, which means literally truth force or soul force. And yeah, in the Fifth Sacred Thing, their tactic is, how do we get, at least even if we can't subvert all the hearts and minds, how do we get the ordinary soldiers to actually see that their interests would lie more with allying with us than continuing to fight for a system that actually is tremendously oppressive to them.
Yeah.
In the City of Refuge, without spoiler, spoiler, I'll say that in Fifth Sacred Thing, when they succeed in tossing out the bulk of the army and bringing a lot of the army over, then in City of Refuge, the question is starting, and now what do we do with these guys?
Yeah. Because they're not indoctrinated in the culture.
Yeah,
they're, you know,
like from
all
a
of these
completely
transplants.
Different.
Yeah.
You know, many of them have been raised and bred for the army and really have known no normal human life or education or anything. So for me, City of Refuge really centered around the question, how can we build the new world when people are so deeply damaged by the old? And
so pretty much it's a book about right now.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's really where we are.
Yeah,
we have
I think
communities that are
the
developing very consciously, and we have other people who are still on the other side, interested in the warmongering and, you know, the solipsistic, you know, nature that has developed.
Yeah, and we see this tremendous divide. You know, I think people are in deep distress overall, like economic, social, emotional distress. I think people sense that the systems we've put our faith in are breaking down all around us and are serving fewer and fewer of us. And when people are in distress, you know, it's very easy to convince them that their distress is those bad people's fault over there.
Scapegoats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also an opportunity, I think, when things are breaking down, to create something new, to say, okay, if these systems aren't working, this actually gives us a chance to say, what kind of place would we like to be living in? What kind of world would we like to create? How do we make that happen? How do we actually build a world on principles of justice and caring for one another, rather than this tremendously competitive, selfish idea that we're all in it just for our own individual good.
Yeah. You know, when I think about this, it's a lot easier to imagine a society that's isolated, and that's what Aldous Huxley did in Island. Oh, this is the island, you know, that had these principles and it developed from there. But what's more difficult when you're talking about a utopian society is not how does that society look, which is an awesome exercise and I think vitally important, but it's how to get from here to there.
Yeah.
You know, like how do we get from what we got now to there? And I'm generally optimistic. The one thing that makes me pessimistic is we have so many people. You know, it's just like, it's such a big, it's just so many numbers out there, you know. Do you think about that, like that transition from, you know, how that could potentially play out?
Yeah. When I'm not writing, the other thing I do is I teach and practice permaculture, which is a whole integrated system of ecological design. And one of the sayings we have in the permaculture movement is the problem is the solution. So I always say, I'm not sure that's always true, but it always makes you look at the situation more creatively. So if you say, how can that problem be a solution? Well, we have lots and lots and lots of people.
Yeah.
But if we look at people not as a blight on the planet, but if we imagine that maybe people are Mother Earth's way of creating like her healing hands and her appreciative eyes and her compassionate heart, and we're just sort of, like working our way to get there.
Yeah.
Then all those people are a tremendous potential force for repairing the damage that we've done and regenerating the ecosystems around us. And it's not just believe, I know that we have the potential, we have the capacity to restore damaged landscapes on a big scale if we look at nature, understand how nature works, and work in harmony instead of working against nature. I'll also say that one tried and true method of population control, not control, but of reducing overpopulation, has been the education and empowerment of women.
Yeah.
When women are empowered and educated, and when society offers the hope and promise that if you have only 1 or 2 kids, they're likely to live to grow up and not die of malnutrition or war or violence, then that problem kind of adjusts itself.
Sure. And open conversations about sex.
Yeah.
Like really understanding, this oppression and putting sex in this guilty framework where it's, nobody wants to talk about it. And if a nipple slips out on TV, it's a national crisis for 3. We all nursed on nipples, all of us. Yeah. Like, let's just get over it. Like, when you do that, then you create situations where people are accidentally having children at a far higher rate because they don't have the information, they don't have the resources, they're not talking about it, they're not practicing conscious lovemaking, they're doing it quick and dirty in a hurry and wherever they are. I mean, not always, of course, but that's what happens when you push something that's natural like that into the dark. And I think that's a major issue that we've had. And obviously in your book, the differences between, the cultural norms around sex from the North and the South are dramatically different. And same in Aldous Huxley's book, Island, between Paula and the mainland. And I think that's a crucial thing to do something and deny our nature, our sexual nature like that is going to have negative ramifications.
I've been also involved in goddess religion and the revival of the old earth-based spirituality for decades. And for me, I got involved as a young woman, and part of that was the idea of being able to see the divine, being able to see the sacred as in female form. First of all, it was tremendously empowering to me as a young woman. But also along with that went the idea that sexuality is something sacred and not something dirty and something to be suppressed.
Yeah.
I always really liked that idea.
Yeah, that's a way better plan.
Right.
Yeah.
Made sense to me anyway. Yeah. And for me, I guess it's always been a theme and sort of a sub-theme there in the writing is like, what would our sexuality look like if we really experienced it as a healing force rather than as a dangerous, dirty, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird time we live in because in the absence of positive information that people are really putting out there in a major way, in a concerted effort, people are learning about sex through Google and, big porn tube sites, and it's like a weird transition where we haven't acknowledged that people are going to find that information. They're either going to get it from a positive source or we're going to leave them to their own devices, which is going to yield probably not the best role models in that field. And it's just funny how, parents will just, not acknowledge the fact that that's going on, that every 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old with a phone is looking at whatever pornography has ever been created in the universe, and they're not taking active steps. They'll still tell them not to go to an R movie or they won't have this discussion. Like, what are you talking about? You're trying to shelter your kid from language or this sexual potentially situation. Like, they're Googling porn. Like, you gotta like come to the realization that this is a different world, and we have to put in positive information to counteract what else is out there.
Yeah, and there's not very much out. Well, I will say this: we've made huge strides in many ways around sexual liberation, around liberation for lesbian and gay and transgendered and gender fluid people, and just the recognition that, oh yes, that is a whole aspect of sexuality that is natural. It's part of human nature. It is part of every society that's ever been. And, that is worlds beyond where it was, say, when I was young myself. But we still have a long way to go, and it's still hard to find a lot of real imagery around sexuality as a healing force that's out there to counter the kind of inherent violence and objectification in a lot of pornography.
Yeah, you look at the education of the youth, and you just think, like, what is really important? Well, I'd put that up there pretty damn high. Like how to navigate substances that are going to intoxicate you should be a major prerequisite class for every freshman. How to use sex as a healing force and a pleasurable force. Like, okay, that would be a prerequisite too. Like, if you're like just taking all of the bullshit that we just take for you can't do that in school, whatever. But if you just rebuilt it, you'd have wise teachers and masters who are providing this information in mass, and then the downstream effects of that would be huge.
Yeah, how to think critically about what you read on the internet.
Exactly.
How to filter through it and figure out what might be true and what might not be true.
Right.
Instead, unfortunately, our educational system has gone the opposite and is teaching less critical thinking and less engagement and much more like control and testing and on every level. It's I don't know have you seen the latest Michael Moore movie?
I haven't.
Oh,
no.
It's wonderful.
Is it really good?
It's Where to Invade Next, and he goes all over Europe, mostly Europe.
Is it in theaters now still?
It didn't get a big run in theaters, so it.
Okay, off on.
If you can't find it
iTunes
there, you can probably find it on iTunes or Netflix.
Yeah.
But at one point, he goes to Finland, which has like the best educated population in the world. Like, they're the highest on every measure. And he says, "How much homework do your kids get?" And they say, "None. We don't do homework." They go to school 3 or 4 hours a day. They found that doing less, and they say kids need time to play and be kids and do other things.
Blasphemy.
Yeah, right.
More work, more homework,
more control.
Yeah. If I'm paying $15,000 for Johnny to go to school, I want him working 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
I want him stressed out. If he doesn't have ulcers by 17, I'm done.
And I want him conditioned to think that that's what life is all about, constantly working and delaying gratification. And,
Heaven will come.
Yeah.
Earth is hell.
Yeah.
That whole idea is just so preposterous. This is the heaven or hell we make.
Yeah.
And that's really the truth of it.
I think it's really important for people to have visions of alternatives, and that's one reason I write some of the stuff I do. Again, there isn't very much utopian fiction out there. Or movies, it's all like Mad Max Fury Road, or it's, which I think is in many ways a brilliant movie, but it's not really a future anyone wants to live in.
No.
And
that future gave me anxiety watching it as a movie.
Yeah.
Right, let alone living in it.
Yeah. And I think it's hard, especially for younger people, to feel optimistic. I've been speaking at colleges and talking to a lot of young people on this tour, and I hear a lot from people like, how do I look into the future and have any hope? How do I have any... sometimes I get the feeling people feel almost guilty if they're not cynical and pessimistic. Like I must be, missing something. And I feel like, how can we actually create the future that we want unless we can at least imagine it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a magical teaching.
That always comes first.
A spiritual principle that you have to be able to envision something before you can create it. And you envision it, and then you put energy into that, and that's what makes something manifest.
Yeah, I think it's Dr. Joe Dispenza. Are you familiar with his work?
No.
He talks about envisioning, and it's that combination of belief with intent.
Yes.
It's that superpowered belief, and that really, he talks about it in the context of, medical stories. He has like over 100 clinical trials where people have healed themselves via the placebo effect, which is really that force of utilizing belief to heal the body. And he treats it, that's one of those things that people just discard that. They say, oh, that's the placebo effect. But when you really look at it, what's the one thing that's treated every single disease known to man, every condition? Oh, the placebo effect has. So what's that? That's your mind.
Yeah.
So your mind has cured absolutely everything, but nobody wants to pay attention to that. Everyone wants to just discard that and disregard the placebo effect. Like, I understand the necessity to disregard the placebo effect when you're testing a supplement. We do that in our trials, double blind, randomized, important. Got it. But on the other hand, why don't we work with that thing that's made that happen? So, and he talks a lot about envisioning, and that's creating that reality and believing it, not just thinking it may be a possibility, but really believing it. And that's what's going to inspire people. I mean, if you go out there and you're talking about that future and you believe that that future is going to happen, that's infectious. Then other people will believe it, and then they'll take action as if it was going to happen. And that's going to be so, so, so much stronger.
I think it's also important to really, really be telling people, like, we could have a future. I mean, yes, things are dire and maybe things are worse than we even suspected, but they could be better than we have ever imagined.
The problem is the solution.
And you have an important part to play in that.
Yeah.
You are here for a reason at this particular time and moment in history. And you need to discover what that reason is, what your unique contribution is to this world, so that you can make it.
Yeah.
And we need to find ways to support one another in that journey, and each of us being able to make the best contribution that we can.
Yeah, 100%. Well, even today, I had that bit of pessimism, but just this conversation alone has just eradicated that. So I'm going full optimism now, Starhawk.
Right.
Because you're right. Like, I mean, that's a brilliant way to look at things. I've always looked at, resistance as assistance, the old Stoic philosophy, like whatever is the obstacle is the way. That's my friend Ryan Holiday wrote a book with that title. But I didn't look at it in that context like you would in permaculture. Oh, you got too many of this tree. What's the, that's the problem. Well, that's the solution.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with that tree to make sure that the whole ecosystem thrives? You got too many of this animal. That's the solution. And I love that way of looking at it, because I've seen people transform. I've been on a lot of these journeys. I've been around, the consciousness movement for a long time and pushing that as part of my life's mission. So I've seen that happen, and I've seen the power of that, and I've seen how hard it is. It's hard to change yourself, let alone help guide another person to change. But I've seen it happen, so that gives me optimism. It gives me optimism for the planet. And now with that final piece, like, all right, instead of looking at these things as detriments, all right, we got nuclear power plants, we got people. I always thought of those like, oh man, that's a big problem.
Yes.
But maybe that's a big solution waiting to happen.
Yeah, and asking, like, well, what could this possibly be the solution to?
Yeah.
Sometimes, like I said, it always makes you look at the problem more creatively.
Yeah, that's great. I want to go into the medical side again. I mentioned it from Dr. Dispenza's point of view, but you have a really interesting way that Maya is a healer in this book. And from my languaging, it would be that she's going into the astral, or that other dimension, the reflection of the material, and she's fixing problems in that space, in that plane, and then which is fixing problems in the material plane. Is that something that is just part of the story for color, or is that something that you kind of explore as a possibility?
It's definitely one of the old, shamanic methods of healing.
Sure.
And Madrone, who's the healer in the book,
Yeah, Madrone. Sorry, I said mine.
She does exactly that. It's like she goes into the astral plane, the spirit plane, the chi worlds, as she calls it sometimes. The idea that there are that every disease, every entity, every species has a kind of oversoul. As the Hawaiians would call it the aumakua. It has a kind of group entity, group beingness. And that if you can address that, then it can have reverberations in the physical world.
Yeah.
And I can't say that I can do it on the level Madrone does in the books, but it's definitely something I've explored. And there's also, there are many different traditional forms of energetic healing. There's that one. There's also just working directly with the energy itself, the sort of, you could call it the etheric energy, and combing it out, moving it out, cleansing it. And then there's also one technique she tries, which is not the most advisable one, of really sucking the disease in, taking it into herself, and then attempting to heal it within herself.
Yeah. Well, you see these different practices in like the ayahuasca shamans. They have a practice called chupando, where they actually suck something up, but they spit it out right away.
Yeah.
They don't keep it in there and try and fix it within themselves. But that's their philosophy. That's their entire paradigm of healing. It's built upon doing exactly what you say. And for someone who's been in those journeys, from the materialist reductionist point of view, this may all sound super woo-woo and like, oh, whatever. But you go to these other cultures and they thrive and on healing practices surrounding this, and then you participate in ceremonies like this where you feel shifts happen, and whether that's created from the mind, as I mentioned, with the power of the placebo effect, the power of the mind to heal the body, which is indisputable that the mind can heal the body, and whether it's just that or whether it's something else, something deeper and another truth that we can't right now at least put down into quantum atoms and figure out what it is from that point of view. Maybe we just don't have the ability to show that yet, but something else is happening. And I think keeping your mind open to that possibility, because once you've been there and experienced some different things like that, it starts to shift your mind, and you see these healers in action in real life, and you're like, well, maybe there is something to this. And
you understand, Western culture and Western science is very much based on this kind of materialism that nothing's real unless it can be quantified and measured, and that's all that we can really discuss and talk about. And we can't admit anything like consciousness or soul or spirit into the equation because they're subjective. You can't quantify them. Actually, even that Western science, I have a friend named David Kubrin who's done a lot of work and research over the years, is writing a book now on Marxism and witchcraft.
Nice.
He's been a big influence on my thinking.
He really is trying to be popular.
Yeah,
really,
right, yeah.
He's running a great popularity contest for the world. I'm sure Trump would love to meet him.
But he started off as an Isaac Newton scholar and realized that even though Isaac Newton in a sense is like the father of this materialist rationalist science, actually he was an alchemist, and actually he believed in all of in a sort of ensouled nature and spirited nature, and that there were all of these different philosophies at that time that believed nature was alive, that still held to that kind of picture of the world which every other human society down through history has held in some form or another. And he had to suppress them because of the politics of the time, that all of those things were starting to be seen as dangerous as to the social order and dangerous to the rise of capitalism at that time.
There's an evolution to things that I think generally takes place, and I think you have to discard when the world is rife with superstitions.
Yeah.
It's hard to just cut out just the tumor.
Yeah.
And leave everything else intact. You end up discarding everything else. Like, all right, look, we're out of control here. We think that these deities are going to throw us in hell. You got Bosch making paintings of crazy. Like, all right, let's get superstition out of here for a little while, right? And when they did that, I think obviously they overstepped, because there's a lot of things that are yet to be proven and yet to be shown. But I'm encouraged by a lot of the research in quantum physics, because they're finding different parallels now as you get smaller and smaller, and our detection abilities get better and better. And I think that trend will continue. I mean, you see these phenomenon like quantum entanglement and the observer effect, and it's like, it doesn't make any sense, and I think as we start to really develop more cohesive theories surrounding all of this, I think there will be materialist examples that we can show from some of these things that right now are in this etheric kind of spiritual category, that we just don't have the ability to detect things on that level. But, as Hermes Trismegistus says, as above, so below, as within, so without. I believe that all of these things are connected. We just have to figure out what the connection is and how to measure it, and that'll happen.
It's another thing I always enjoy, speculating about, and that kind of weaves its way into the writing in the books. It's like, what would science be like if it admitted consciousness?
Yeah.
In the Fifth Sacred Thing, they have a whole computer network that shuts down during the invasion. Partly it shuts down during the invasion because when I was writing it in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have all these, we just had computers were this new thing. And, right? I hadn't done a lot of thinking about how they were going to influence all of life, and didn't really want to deal with them really in the book. But, the idea is they shut down because to make them work, you have to cooperate with them. They have to like you. And if they don't like you, they won't work for you. And being not like the most techno type person myself, I find that happens Right.
I remember particularly back in the old PC days, that would happen all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, computer fresh, like, what is going on here?
It's
but
like, please don't crash on me now. Right. Yeah.
You have to give Apple some credit though, because they really changed that paradigm. I don't get nervous anymore when I start my computer. I know that thing's going to turn on and fire up. They've done a good job of that. So let's explore some of the other topics in the book that I really appreciated. One of which was the creating your own rituals around things, and that's, I think, another area that I talk about it a lot, but. I think we just kind of take for granted the rituals that come in. This is this holiday, so we do it's Valentine's. Well, you got to buy the chocolates, and you do this thing, and there's the lingerie, and this is Halloween. Okay, well, you dress in this costume, and the candy, and marriage, death, all of these things we just kind of accept, like you would accept a stock contract for your business, but you never want to do. You want to create it so that it fits you and serves you and your society and your tribe even better. So I thought that was really cool. And I remember one of the rituals was the I think it was like the Halloween ritual or the All Hallows ritual. Yeah. And so is that influenced, by some of your knowledge of, pagan rituals and some of that culture?
That's something I've been doing for many, many years now. When, back in the 70s and the early 80s, a lot of us were kind of coming out of the activism around the Vietnam War and saying, like, now what? What's next? We're starting to do environmental and anti-nuclear activism. But we're also kind of hungry for some connection to spirit, but something that didn't make us disengage from the world. That said, these issues we're struggling with, these are spiritual issues as well. And many of us were looking back into some of those old European traditions around the goddesses. We were looking at witchcraft as the continuance of those pre-Christian healing traditions and land-based worship traditions in Europe and in the Middle East. got a bad rap from the Catholic Church.
Yeah, more than a bad rap.
Yeah, right. Much more than a bad rap. It got severely suppressed and persecuted. And
I heard a figure that, something like 5 million, quote, witches were burned at the stake or executed during the times of the Inquisition and the Catholic oppression. And you think about the effects of that downstream. I mean, all of that knowledge. I mean, what is a witch? A witch is a woman who's in her power working with the plants and healing people in general.
Yeah.
There's probably some other kind of darker form of witchcraft. It's certainly from the shamanic perspective, there's, you don't want to run into one of those down in the deep jungle, and I'm sure there's probably some of those in Europe as there is in Peru. I'm not going to say that wasn't the case, but most of the time it's just herbalists, people working with the plants, people thinking outside the box, and all of those knowledge traditions smashed. 5 million women with that knowledge killed, and then everything else drawn way underground rather than out in the light, so that information could breed with information and create new information in this natural process of things that are supported.
And even more, I mean, nobody's really knows about the actual numbers, but the impact, it's kind of like the war on terrorism today, the actual numbers of terrorists, compared to the population are extremely small, and even the numbers of people accused of it aren't that big in terms of the population, but the impact of constantly being on the alert for that reverberates through every aspect of life. And it was similar. It wasn't even how many witches they killed, it was the fact that anyone could be accused. And it could be used against you whether there was any basis for it or not. Oftentimes it was used against a woman who just had property somebody else wanted, because if someone was accused of being a witch, it was kind of like there was no, if you denied it, that was proof that you just weren't repentant. Right?
No, there was really good tests. Like they had that one test where they threw you in the water. And if you drowned, you weren't a witch. Sorry. Whoops. Right. But if you swam, you're
then
clearly a witch.
So, it was...
no confirmation bias there.
Right,
It's either die innocent or die guilty.
And so the impact, I think, was to create this tremendous underlying fear that I believe is still with us in a lot of ways around any of those ideas, again, of nature being alive, of the earth being sacred, of herbalism and traditional medicines and healing methods and all these things as being somehow suspect and dangerous. I think a lot of that is shifting today, but I think still it's hard for people on the way. I think it's embedded in our unconsciousness. For women, it's often about, if I stand up, if I speak out, if I really am here present in my full power, will I be cut down? It's almost a fear in the DNA that comes up. And I think for all of us, it's sort of like, if I go too far into these strange ideas, it was safer to retreat into sheer materialism, because then I don't have to deal with these things that now trigger these deep, deep unconscious memories of fear and persecution around the idea that the stuff we're dealing with here on Earth might actually be alive and have a consciousness that's different from ours, but a consciousness that's very real.
Well, that is the perspective that you get when you do enough work around it. You start to feel this thing. You start to talk to the overminds of these things. I mean, I've had discussions with the overmind of mosquitoes. I didn't plan that. That wasn't something I wanted to have happen, but it's just one of the ways it goes when you start to traverse these realms. But I think you make a great point about that kind of aspect of women, and I think men are inherently, I think people are violent towards that which they're afraid of. And I think that a woman in her full power is terrifying to a man who's not conscious and is scared of these different things that they don't understand. The ability to come to knowledge without logic, just come to knowledge with intuition alone, and all of these other attributes that can be part of the sacred feminine. But so society, which is through the media and through a variety of things, is very still male dominant, I think has instilled, combination with these ancestral fears, you get, particularly I see a lot of women who are so focused on the youth and beauty aspect, which is just one stage of womanhood, and not focused on the maturing into their magic, into their power.
Yeah.
And that's truly, truly unfortunate, because each stage has inherent beauty and value if you value it as such. But if you're, no matter how old you get, you're still trying to be the 21-year-old flirty girl, you're missing the boat. You should be a powerful goddess, and in the bloom of that, be able to do all of those things that come with that stage, and that should be the goal for that stage.
And of course, you get a million messages constantly, and advertising and everything else bombarding you, saying you should look a certain way, you should present yourself a certain way, and for women and for men too, and certainly for anyone who's in between or gender fluid. There's starting to be a little bit more, but there's not much in the culture that really affirms you, that says, the way you are is how you should be, right? And the question is, how do you take what you are and what you're given, and again, develop it to the fullest, so that you can make that contribution, you can give that gift you came here to give.
Yeah.
And it's not really about the brand of perfume that you buy or the makeup you put on your face.
Optimization is not homogenization.
Yeah.
It's bringing out your own unique gifts. And I think that's a really important way to look at it, for sure. What are your thoughts on, and it's a topic explored in the book, the differences around the structure of monogamy that we have in this culture, and how that affects society, and particularly women, from your perspective?
Well, I think in the Fifth Sacred Thing, I was really exploring ideas about, what would it be like to be in a society where sexuality and relationships were not connected to the idea of ownership. How would that play out? And where people could really affirm like a whole kind of multiplicity of sexualities, where it's not just you have to be one man, one woman, tied together forever.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that plays out for people in life, in real life today. I sometimes worry that people will read the stuff in the book and go like, oh, she's telling me I should go do this or not, right? It's always easy to experiment in fiction without the consequences you face in real life. But I feel like younger people today, I think, really are less bound into these set roles than certainly the era. I mean, I was born in 1951. I was raised as a child of the 50s and the early 60s. All you have to do is like watch an episode of Mad Men, and you'll understand why there was a feminist revolution.
Yeah.
And so, in the City of Refuge, there's actually a whole long scene set in the Temple of Love. I won't spoil it for you, but it sort of takes that idea of sexuality and healing and pushes it again to its edge. And it's not so much that I'm saying you should go set this up and do it, but it's more, what would our imagination be like if we freed it from these sort of boundaries of you must do it this way and this is the only way that it can be.
I'd like to look at it, I always, as you do, like to ascend to the most conscious perspective, and work backwards from there. What's the most conscious perspective? Well, the idea that you own another person's pleasure is inherently unconscious. How could somebody else's pleasure hurt you? It's like, it's logically unsustainable to believe that, this person's pleasure causes pain for me. Pleasure is pleasure. Love is love. But again, once you get possession and ego and identity all wrapped up into that, then someone's pleasure or love can create create immense pain for you, and at least through the ego. And I think that's, but the most conscious perspective is not ownership.
And at the same time, I kind of believe there's a phase in life where people want to explore sexuality, and you're just flooded with hormones, and you just really want to do everything, try everything. And then there's a phase in life where it actually may be appropriate to just say, you know what, I'm going to settle down with this person and really dive into this relationship. And maybe I no longer have to go jump into bed with every cute person I see, because I've done that, right?
Sure.
And I know, it's not all that different no matter who you're doing it with. And I want to really make a commitment.
Yeah.
But I actually believe that kind of commitment is stronger if it's not forced, if it's not like you have to be this way, because anything else is bad and wrong and evil. If it comes out of saying this is the point in our development and our maturity where, we have, really, people have so much going on in life. It's hard to have the time and energy to develop fully more than, you can't, I always used to say when I was younger, never have more than one lover at a time or less than 5. Right? Because, if you really want to develop a relationship, it's good to have that focus.
Yeah.
And if you really want to just madly explore, then great, go ahead and do that. Where you get into trouble is where you've got 2 or 3 and they're all bouncing against each other and fighting with each other. And
Well, any situation can be positive, depending on what the different parties, bring to it.
Yeah.
For sure. I think I liken it to when I was younger, the first time I swam with dolphins in a cove where they were free to come, and they just knew that these researchers were there, and the researchers were very kind, and they were learning from the dolphins. And the dolphins just showed up, so you could cruise over, and most likely you would get an encounter with the dolphins. So I was there, and I was a good swimmer. I had my fins on, and I just paired up with this one dolphin, and I was just cruising around. It's one of the best experiences of my life, just a real connection with this dolphin. And so that just kind of blew my mind. I was wide open, and anytime I got a chance to swim with dolphins, I wanted to do it. Well, the next time I was in a different state, and I went to like a SeaWorld type of thing. And this dolphin was forced to swim with every different individual, right? Forced, they were confined, and that's how they got fed. And it was a radically different experience.
Yeah.
Both times I was swimming with dolphins, but one time the dolphin was free. And it was just us paired off. And then this other time I was paired off with a dolphin, but it wasn't free. It was compelled and it was forced, and it lost all the magic. And I think that's absolutely right. Like a monogamous container can be incredibly beautiful and rewarding, but if it's done as, if you're forced to do it, it loses its magic, whereas even just knowing that both of you are free, will foster a deeper passion and a deeper love, because I think it's the most conscious perspective, and that fire will stay hotter than if you try to confine it and bottle it up and allow the jealousy to create these walls. And as I think I've said this in a previous podcast, but as Don Miguel Ruiz, one of my favorite teachers, describes, the relationship becomes the monster that eats love, rather than just fostering it and being the bedrock and the soil that allows the flowers to grow. Yeah. So all of these topics are kind of woven in. I wanted to ask you quickly, it was a very interesting episode with bees and Madrone in there. Where did that kind of come from? What was that? Is that just a vision you had, or was that some imagination?
Well, at the time when I was writing the book, my mother lived in LA. She was sick a lot. I was spending a lot of time down there trying to take care of her. And I have an old friend, David Abram, who's an amazing writer and thinker around ecology. He wrote a book called The Spell of the Sensuous, which is a very important book. And at one point in his life, he was a stage magician, and he got some kind of grant to go to Indonesia and Nepal and study with traditional shamans and sort of meet the magician to magician, and had these incredible experiences, just really, amazing experiences where what would happen is he'd go into town and do some sleight of hand magic, and people would not believe him when he said it was a trick. They would believe he was a magician who had powers, and they'd be like wanting him to bless their children or their fishing boats or cure their diseases.
Right.
Right. But anyway, he had come up with this theory that when they were like in Bali, when they make offerings to the spirits, and the ants come and eat them, like the ants actually are the spirits, that it's not about supernatural powers, it's about connecting with the actual natural powers of what's around you. And he was in LA, and we took a hike up in the canyons one day, and I was talking about the book and when I was formulating, and there were all these beehives, and he was saying like, maybe you could do something with the bees. And so I started to think about that and went back and started to learn about bees and read about bees, and was amazed at, when you actually read the biology of the bee, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
It raises those questions about consciousness that scientists don't like to ask. But, the bee is born knowing what to do.
Right.
They take on these different tasks and these different things, and they do that from birth, and they go through different stages, and it's a hive consciousness, and you kind of go, well, if there is no such thing as consciousness, how can this hive consciousness actually exist?
Right.
In all these separate individual bodies.
Yeah.
So that got me thinking about bees and meditating on bees and thinking about what kind of healing might they have in a place where they really had no resources. And that was where the bee stuff came from.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think there's also been some explorations that I've seen where you see a school of fish. And that school of fish, they all turn at exactly the same time.
Yeah.
They're just cruising around and boom, left turn. Like every single one in line, at the same moment. And you see these things like that. And like, how does that happen, without this kind of collective consciousness? But then, you start to look at these things like quantum entanglement, where, different particles at the exact same moment, separated on different sides of the planet. If you alter the movement of one, it will alter the movement of the other. So then all of a sudden, this mysterious thing that has no material or space, say, oh, well, maybe there is these quantum connections. And for me, it's easier because I believe that we're all connected in another dimension, which I've, experienced myself personally. But even in this one, at the very smallest level of these particles, it's very possible that, all of these bees share some aspects of, the atomic structure, and also, perhaps on the consciousness level. So it certainly makes sense to me.
The scientist who talks about that is Rupert Sheldrake.
Yeah, the morphic resonance field.
Yeah, I love his stuff. And,
me too.
He has this one great book that's something about 10 questions science doesn't want, 10 common things,
Yeah.
like dogs who know when their owners have left work, even though they have no way of knowing it.
All right.
And I've seen that happen in ritual, over and over and over again. Like you'll have a whole group of 100 people singing and chanting together, and the chant will come to an end. It'll stop. And it's not like there's a director saying, okay, 1, 2, 3, stop. It just, everyone, because we're linked and we're connected in that deep level, it's like the chant has a life and a form of its own that we're all following.
Yeah. I've seen it with freestyle drummers.
Yeah.
The people changing rhythm
Yeah.
perfectly in unison together. A song they've never practiced. People they've never met, just beating the drums, and all of a sudden, boom, different direction. There's a lot more to things that we can't explain.
I feel like we're going through a big shift in paradigms now, or attempting to, as a society, as an overarching culture, that really, if you could boil it all down, it's from seeing the world as separated, isolated objects to understanding the world as a web of relationships. And that's going on at those deep levels of science with quantum physics. It's going on in psychology, which I also studied, where people are, looking not just at the individual, but at family therapy and the relational webs that you're in. It's going on in ecology, where it's understanding it's not separate, isolated species, it's whole ecosystems and how they co-evolve together. And I just hope we can make the shift in time enough to avoid destroying the world.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, no, definitely.
Get on with the business of regenerating and restoring it.
Yeah. So let's, we only have probably 5-10 minutes left here. So what are some kind of practical tips, either from permaculture or rituals that you've really found, or meditation practices that you found particularly beneficial? Maybe we'll take these one at a time. If everybody just wants to start some small little bit of permaculture, what do you recommend? Where's a good place to start?
Well, I always recommend this both for permaculture and also for spiritual connection. Everything else is to start by giving yourself time for your own relationship with nature. Start with a personal practice of spending some time in nature every day, even if that's only like 5 minutes while you're waiting for the bus or something. But putting yourself in a state of awareness where you can open up and watch and look and listen to what nature is telling you, and really paying attention to what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, even to those physical senses.
Yeah.
Because if you do that, you'll start to understand that nature is always communicating to us. And if you open yourself to that communication, I believe it feeds you on a deep level and on an energetic level. Then the second thing I would say is think about what's sacred to you. Like, what is it? Not sacred in the sense of what you bow down to, but in the sense of what you most deeply care about. What you care about, that you care about more than your own personal convenience or comfort or pleasure. What is it you're passionate about? And find a way to put your best life energies at its service. And the third thing is connect with other people around it. Both community. To celebrate it, but also to protect it, to defend it, to organize around it. And then the fourth thing I would probably say is educate yourself. Like, read about these things. Take some courses. Come take a permaculture design course. Come take one of ours. We teach them all the time.
Yeah.
Learn at a deep level so that you have skills and tools to bring to the work.
Yeah. All very good advice, but you can't end on 4 things when your book is called The Fifth Sacred Thing. So you got to dig one more up, Starhawk. Come on, we can't end with 4. It doesn't make sense. One final tip from the magic bag here.
Well, what I was going to say for the 5th is you need to really envision what you want. I believe we do need to stand up against what we don't want. That there are times we have to resist it. We have to just say no to the atrocities that are going on. But I think our no is always stronger when we know what the yes is. So know what your yes is. Know what is the world that you want, the vision that you're working towards. And then do the work that you need to do, again, to ally with other people, to organize together, and to create it.
Beautiful. Well, everybody, I hope you appreciated and enjoyed this as much as I do. Please, if you get a chance and listen to this, read The Fifth Sacred Thing, read City of Refuge. I'm going to start reading it, so I'll read it along with you. Books available, Amazon, bookstores, through your website too? Or
my website is starhawk.org, and there's links there to where you can get the book and also to the writings. I have written 12 other books that you can find there. And we do teach permaculture design courses. We do courses in social permaculture and how we apply these principles to people. I do a lot of talks and workshops and things all the time, so you can find all of that there at starhawk.org.
Starhawk.org. Make it happen.